Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first session that we'll be having on infectious pathology. This topic is quite broad, and this lecture is not meant in any way to supplant um, whatever classes you will be having in microbiology. So the intent and the focus of this lecture is to talk about the generalities of infectious diseases as a whole, and you will be discussing amongst yourselves specific infections, which you will be talking about later on in the next few meetings. Now, infectious diseases contribute significantly to the morbidity and mortality of the general population. And majority of those that are hit the most hard are either in patients who are old, those who have problems with their immune systems, and those who have long-standing chronic diseases that act as comorbidities. Like for example, patients with long-standing problems with the heart, patients who have problems with the kidneys, patients who are diabetic, and they constitute more than half of the top 10 causes of death in developing countries. And these infectious diseases are further made more dangerous by virtue that these developed countries have problems with nutritional states of their infants and unsanitary living conditions. Now, how do microorganisms cause disease? Microorganisms, the human body is not sterile. Okay, so there are the body plays host to a lot of microorganisms, both good and bad. And just because there are microorganisms in parts of the body, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will cause disease right away. In fact, there are plenty of organisms which are vital who have established a commensal relationship with their host organisms. Okay, so when do microorganisms cause disease? Usually, this happens when there is weakening of the normal host defenses, which cause healthy microbial flora to cause pathological infection. So this is particularly true for the mouth. The mouth is not necessarily a clean place. There are lots of organisms living there. But once there is an imbalance leading to a dysfunction of the immune system, what are usually part of the normal flora become pathogenic. Okay, organisms that are not normally part of the flora of the body can of course cause disease, and they can range from they can cause diseases that range from mild disease to more serious disease. Okay, you also have a group of organisms that are highly infectious and they produce disease even in the most healthiest of individuals. Now, how can microorganisms how can microorganisms cause infection? So as mentioned, this is due to the attenuation of the immune system, but these microorganisms need to have access to the body. So this may be through the skin and the GI tract, the respiratory tract, or the urogenital tract. Okay? Now, for the skin, they will have, of course, these organisms will have to cross the normal defense mechanisms. For example, the skin is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, which can act as a protective barrier. So once these mechanisms are breached, like for example, bites of insects, mechanical defects like burns, needle punctures, or direct implantation of the organism, then these bugs can enter the skin and cause infections. Okay? The GI tract, for the GI tract, and routes of entries of microbes can be through breaking through the epithelial barrier. So there are organisms that secrete substances that can allow them to burrow through the epithelial barrier. Okay. Um, some eggs and cysts of parasites are resistant to acids, which allow them to stay in the GI tract. So this is particularly true with the worms that are living in the intestines. Okay, so they are not killed off by stomach fluid. Okay, viruses can be resistant to the various chemicals like bile and pancreatic enzymes that are secreted. Usually they destroy microorganisms, but some microorganisms aren't destroyed by it, including viruses. And certain infections are usually caused by normal flora, but usually they are kept in check by normal gut bacteria. So if ever you take in antibiotics indiscriminately, these antibiotics may destroy the normal flora, allowing these pathogenic bacteria to take over. An example for this is Clostridium difficile, which leads to the formation of pseudomembranes in the intestines. Okay, for the respiratory tract, the respiratory tract is generally protected by the cilia or hair-like structures within the lining of the epithelia and macrophages, but they can be overcome by certain encapsulated bacteria like Haemophilus or bacteria that are highly resistant to degradation, like Mycobacteria tuberculosis. Now, microbes can also be passed vertically, that is, from mother to child. And these take place either in the placenta. Okay, so the placenta is the vascular communication between the mother and the baby. So this is particularly dangerous for women who have had rubella or German measles during the first trimester. This will lead to congenital abnormalities or even abortion of the kid. Okay, during birth, sometimes viruses may also be transmitted, bacteria may also be transmitted during the process of labor. Okay, and sometimes organisms may be transmitted through maternal milk, including CMV, HBV, and HIV. Okay, as mentioned, they breach through the different portals of entry. Some of them can spread through the nerves. Others spread by hijacking inflammatory cells, and this is where they grow. Okay, so examples of this include mycobacteria, which may reside in macrophages. Okay? And sometimes these organisms either spread through the bloodstream and the lymphatics to cause infection elsewhere in the body. Now, how are diseases transmitted? So diseases may be transmitted from one person to another via respiratory, orophycal, sexual, and transplacental routes. Another is through zoonotic infections. So zoonotic infections are infections that are transmitted from animals to humans. Okay? Vectors may also serve as a means to carry organisms from one host to another. So examples for this would be dengue, malaria, etc., etc. Okay. Vectors can also be seen in other insects, like for example, Lyme disease caused by Borrelia burgdorferi may also may be also transmitted by a tick, Ixodes tick, and this leads to the formation of a bullseye rash and generalized feeling of sickness. Okay? Now, how does the body fight against infections? Of course, you have the innate and adaptive immune system, which was mentioned last time. Okay, and it is important that these portions of the immune system are left intact to prevent infections. In fact, if you have infections of specific arms of the immune system, you will be predisposed to infections of certain bacteria. Okay? For example, if you have infections of T cells, if you have problems with your T cells, you tend to be predisposed to um, infections of encapsulated organisms like Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, Neisseria meningitidis. Okay, now if there is a stalemate between the immune system of the host and the microbes, and this results in a state of microbial latency. So the microorganism exists, but it does not cause damage. However, this is particularly important because these individuals, although not outright um, infectious, although not outright um, sick, can can become sources of infections as well. Okay? Subsequent diminution of host immunity can result in aggressive reactivation of disease. An example would be um, the varicella zoster virus. So varicella causes chickenpox. Okay, so it is an organism. It is a virus that resides that has a predilection towards the dorsal nerves. Okay, now even if the chickenpox infection um, subsides, you actually have viral particles that remain in the nerves, and as a result, they lie in a state of dormancy. Now, if the immune system becomes compromised by whatever cause, then um, the virus reactivates and you will have a painful reactivation in one part of the body of the chickenpox. And this time around, you call it shingles. Okay, shingles is usually seen in relatively old individuals, but you can see it in immunocompromised young individuals as well. Okay? Now, the, my, the microorganisms that invade the body also have ways to evade the infection, and this includes antigenic variation. So it causes rearrangements of the sequences in the molecules of the cell wall to prevent it from being recognized by the immune system. Remember that the white blood cells recognize infectious agents with the presence of pathogen associated molecular patterns or PAMs. So what they do is that some organisms create create mutations within their genes to facilitate a change in the molecules that make up their cell wall. So as a result, they will form different proteins that will not be recognized by the immune system. So this is known as antigenic variation. Okay. There are organisms as well that have resistance to antimicrobial peptides by producing substances that degrade um, these antimicrobial peptides. Some organisms are also resistant to phagocytosis, and this is particularly true with organisms like TB. So even if kinakain siya, even if the macrophages eat it up, they will still be living within the macrophages. They will not die. Other examples of organisms that are resistant to phagocytic killing are Neisseria gonorrhoeae, which is a facultative, intracellular facultative organism, causes gonorrhea, a sexually transmitted disease, which causes very painful urination, and then you will have pus coming out of your sex organ. And in Bisaya, it's called tulo, Neisseria gonorrhoeae. So it can occur within the WBCs, within the neutrophils. They will not be destroyed. Okay. Other organisms evade apoptosis, which allows replication and even transforms the cell. This is particularly true for viruses. So these are the other mechanisms. Okay. Now, as mentioned, the in response to the microorganism, the body will try to undergo a process of inflammation. Okay, and as a result, some of the cells can be damaged not by virtue of the disease itself, but by virtue of the collateral effects of the inciting inflammatory response. So examples would be granulomatous reaction, okay, liver damage following HBV injury. Okay, remember that HBV can sometimes be chronic and persistent. So in the liver, there will be a state of damage coinciding with repair. So as a result, the long-standing chronic injury and repair process will damage the stroma, okay, leading to um, leading to faulty repair. Okay, so there is also in some cases there is also molecular mimicry, in which case um, antibodies antibodies are formed um, against antibodies are formed against normal molecules in the immune system. Like for you, this is particularly true for rheumatic heart disease. In rheumatic heart disease, an antibody is formed against the organism. And once you have these preformed antibodies will also attack normal structures in the body. Like for example, the heart valves, which will which closely mimic the molecules in the organism that caused the inflammation. Okay. So before we proceed, let's take a quick break. I will see you in another lecture for the second part of this topic. All right. Thank you very much.